Good afternoon, y'all. This is Lauren with People for Liberty, and we're excited for the launch of our Liberty Lunch Power Hour. So, we had anticipated launching this maybe in February or a little bit down the road once we had kind of stacked our deck. But with everything happening in our nation, we knew that we had to really come to the table together, determine what we could do as an organization to lean into this opportunity to commiserate with you, to share with you, to learn from you regarding how you felt and your thoughts about both the insurrection at the Capitol last week, fallout from that, and then how we can come together and support you in your growth in the liberty movement and one another. So I'm really grateful today to be joined by our good friend Dan Fishman, former executive director at the Libertarian Party and LNC, and our good friend Miss Ashley Shade, who's the president of Outright Libertarians. Hey Dan, hey Ashley.
Hey Lauren, thanks so much for having us. I really appreciate being here. And one of the things that I definitely wanted to talk about at this point in time is what's happening with the country. And Lauren talked a little bit about how we were going to, I guess there's a planned later launch or anything like this, but it's been an incredible 11 days. One of the funniest comments I heard about this, Ashley, and tell me what you think about, is that we should consider last Wednesday, when the Capitol was stormed, as December 37th, and say that happened in 2020, and then we can keep all that in the past. Tell me, what were you doing on Wednesday? Actually, let's do some introductions first. So you are, of course, Ashley Shade. You are the chairwoman of Outright Libertarians. Let's start with that. What is Outright Libertarians?
Yeah, so Outright Libertarians is an organization dedicated to GSM issues. For those who don't know the term GSM, LGBTQ, we use the term GSM for gender and sexual minorities because it's just easier to say.
You never have to add another letter to it.
Exactly. It's completely inclusive, and it includes all gender and sexual minorities. And our purpose is to be the voice for GSM people in the Libertarian Party and to be the bridge to bring people to liberty. And so we are focused on efforts involving outreach to the GSM community who do not self-identify as libertarians, in hopes to bring them to liberty and to be that bridge and represent the party to the GSM community, and also make sure that GSM issues and people are represented and heard within the liberty movement.
So that's great. I think it's Outright's been around for a long time. I think it's been one of the really consistently positive influences in the Libertarian Party. How did you come to be involved? When did you become the chair of the Outright Libertarians?
Yeah, so I got involved in Outright in 2019. At the time, there was a group of people that the libertarians wanted to work with and send to Washington, D.C. for the first ever National Transgender Visibility March. And
I was there.
You were there. You were one of the people that came. And Outright sponsored me to go because I'm a trans activist, and they felt that I would be a great voice and great representative to be there. And after that event and being able to go and being sponsored by the organization outright, they appointed me to fill some open positions that they had on the board. And so I became the policy and outreach director and helped with those particular areas until June of 2020 when we held elections for a new board and I was elected chairwoman.
Awesome. So now we know a little bit about you. We know a little bit about Outright.
Yes.
Let's talk about the broader scope of things. Last Wednesday, where were you when you heard things are about to get crazy?
Yeah, I was here in my home. I work from home right now, and I was working from home here. My day job is I work for Wayfair in customer service, so I take telephone calls and emails and help take care of customers. And I was working, and somebody mentioned something in one of the group chats about, hey, there's something going on at the Capitol. And then my phone started blowing up, and a bunch of people were like, hey, do you see what's going on? And my first thought was, oh God, somebody's going to die. And unfortunately, several people died. And it was, they say that December 7th is a day that'll live in infamy, but you can add January 6th to that list.
You know, it's interesting because there are some people who are trying to minimize what happened. On the other hand, there are some people who I don't know if you had a chance to see Arnold Schwarzenegger, who I haven't in the past thought of as a deep thinker on a lot of political issues, but he put out a wonderful piece on Twitter saying, I grew up in Austria. I am familiar with Kristallnacht, and I'm familiar with the shame that a nation had after that. Do you think that's hyperbolic? Think that's reasonable?
Yeah, absolutely. This was a dark day in our country. What happened here is that we had people so angry and upset and fearful that their leader lost that they were ready to install their own dictator in the United States. That's what they wanted to do. That should scare everybody. The fact that a group of people wanted to have a dictator in the United States. That's
Right.
not part of our country. That's not part of our history. That's not our values and what we represent.
You know, it's interesting. I went live with Libertarios Hispanos, which is the Spanish language broadcast of the Libertarian Party, that Wednesday. And there were people who had come from countries in Central and South America saying, this is what we fled. We fled mobs like this trying to install, you know, their own version of the government. And it really is astonishing the number of people who think, to me, that was okay, that it's okay that that sort of thing happened. And still, so here's our first question. You know, one of the things that Outright has been doing for a long time is making people get used to the fact that there are blind spots in their lives. There are lots of people who have not been aware or maybe willfully ignorant of some of the challenges that are facing the GSM community. And Outright's been really good about saying, hey, look, you know, you pretending that it doesn't exist doesn't make it go away. This is kind of a situation like that, isn't it? I mean, we have to somehow wake people up. I'm guessing that you, like me, have friends who are in the Republican Party. And so how do we wake them up to the fact that there are all these issues that they need to own?
Yeah, absolutely. When a group becomes marginalized, you know, their issues have to be spoken about and heard. And groups like these that come out with extreme violence and rhetoric are not helping anybody's cause, and they're only causing more harm to society. And as libertarians, we believe in this idea, this beautiful idea that you should be able to live your life however you choose, as long as you're not hurting other people. And so We can't do that when people are violent. We can't do that when people are advocating for people in government who want to take away rights of other people, who want to control other people and what they do and what they say and how they behave. And as long as politicians keep getting elected who message and say that a particular person's lifestyle or race or religion or gender is wrong or not okay, then we have a responsibility in the liberty movement to stand up against that and say, no, that is not okay. That is not freedom. And you need to stop. And Outright is proud to be a voice to lead that conversation and step up and fight against that type of behavior. Dan, I can't hear you.
That's good. I'm glad there's somebody else on here to remind me of that. Thank you very much that's a really great point. I want to remind all the people who are tuning in right now, you're watching the People for Liberty Lunch Hour. We are going to start bringing you an hour every day of good liberty conversations, talk about what's happened, because there's stuff out there. If you want to know more about People for Liberty, you can check us out at peopleforliberty.org, or you can follow us on Twitter. In fact, you can follow me and Ashley on Twitter as well. All of our various Twitter handles down there at the bottom. Please give us a follow. So let's talk about where the country goes now in terms of, we know that this terrible thing happened. Mm-hmm. And now there's talk about an impeachment or invoking the 25th Amendment. In fact, I already know the 25th Amendment has been rejected. So what do you think? Do you think that it's worth it? Should the country go through another impeachment? Or, one of the things people remember about Gerald Ford is that he pardoned Richard Nixon as soon as he took office. He said, let's get past this issue. Let's move past. On the other hand, what Richard Nixon did was nothing compared to what's happened now. What are your feelings about this call for impeachment right now?
I think it's to send a message, because we have 9 days until the next president takes the oath of office and the current president steps aside. 9 days. And the impeachment's not going to go to Senate and it's not going to go to trial. But what it does is it sends a message and says, if you incite violence as a leader in this nation, as a political leader, as the president, then you will face consequences. And I think it is important to say we cannot accept this type of behavior, and it's not okay. And so I'm okay with this impeachment. I think this impeachment trial was rightful. I think that it is okay to seek impeachment of the president and let people vote and decide. But he's not going to be removed from office because it's never going to get through the Senate. And by the time that would even happen, we'll have a new president anyway. So it's very symbolic. But I also think it's important that we stand up against this type of political violence and make sure that people understand it is not okay.
So in that vein, we have, we talked a little bit about some of the sort of the people having to own it. How do we address the disbelief, the people who think it didn't happen? I have a lot of, well, I don't want to say a lot, but I have people I consider friends who are like, oh, that was Antifa. Antifa infiltrated the demonstration. And what's crazy about it, of course, is that there was an elected Republican from West Virginia who was in there. So if Antifa has infiltrated the Republican Party so thoroughly that they're getting elected as Republican, then they probably won everything, right? So it's either that or we have to somehow wake people up to this reality. Is the easiest thing for us to do do we be gentle and say, okay, go live in your own reality? Do we say, look, you're having a dissociative episode? How do we confront the people who believe all these things that just aren't true?
It's very difficult to connect and get through to people when something like this happens. A lot of people want somewhere else to blame. They don't want to look at themselves and see themselves in this group. They don't want to look at themselves and see that people that believe in the things that they've believed in are doing these terrible things. They don't want to associate with that. But that's the same kind of attitude and behavior that led to Nazis taking power in Germany, right? They
Right.
ignore the problem. They just allow these crazy people to continue to gain momentum and gain power, blame everybody else, and continue to just march through. And so it's important in two aspects that yes, we need to be very stern and call out terrible behavior. We have to be willing to do that. We have to strongly oppose violence and rhetoric that is harmful. But at the same time, we have to not hate people. We have to not hate those who don't believe in what we believe in. Because if we hate and we react with our own hatred towards people, it will harden their own hatred in their own positions. And we just get further split apart. We have to be willing to treat everyone, even the people who do horrible things, with dignity. We have to attempt to educate. And I'm not talking about somebody who's actively trying to hurt you. You step away from that. But somebody who has opposing views, who doesn't agree with you, it's important that we still show them compassion and empathy as a human being and recognize their humanity and their flaws as humans. You're muted, Dan.
I promise not to do that more than 3 more times. I think you're making a really important point there, because a lot of the times we look at people who have made decisions that we don't understand, and we react towards them angrily.
Yes.
Like, how do you do stuff like that? But we don't really make any progress that way, because, I mean, at least for me, my goal, and I think the goal of most libertarians, is that we want to have a place where we are respectful of everybody, and we don't just want that because we want to respect everybody, but we want everybody to respect us as well.
Yes.
Tolerance and liberty are really two sides of the same coin, right?
Well, it's not even tolerance. You don't have to tolerate somebody's terrible viewpoints, but you still have to recognize that they are human beings. And if you show them compassion and have normal conversations with them and show them kindness, you're a lot more likely to try to win them over and change their minds than you are if you go on the offensive. Because when people are being pushed against, they push back. They get harder in their positions. And that's what's led to the discourse in this country altogether. We have two political parties who have taken their message and said, they're worse than we are. You must oppose them. You must fight them. It is your livelihood at stake if you don't. And with those types of attitudes where everyone who disagrees with you is the enemy, what it causes is a lot of animosity towards other people. It dehumanizes people, and it leads to things like this: a broken Congress, a broken political system, violence, chaos, and it leads to those people being put in charge not even being qualified to hold office. They're literally just running somebody on their party line so they can beat the other people, not because they believe in their candidates. Nobody believes in Joe Biden, but he was better than Trump to the Democrats, and so they went along with it. But they don't actually believe in Joe Biden. He was a horrible politician who created half the problems in this nation while he was in office.
I think you're making a great point in that, to some extent, there's a lot of Democrats who viewed Joe Biden as the lesser of two evils.
Exactly.
Even though, it's a phrase that libertarians, we sort of hate that thing. But I think you're right. What you're talking about is the path that makes it all work. how do we convince people who are like, where was the compassion for me when Obama was president? When, the healthcare plan that they told me, that the president told me would never be taken away from me, and then it was taken away from me. Where was the compassion for, and I'm doing transference there, but they're going to argue that they were not treated with compassion. How do we convince people that we're going to treat that we are the party that believes that everybody should be treated equally with compassion?
Yeah, well, we have to be the examples ourselves. We have to lead that. We have to show people compassion, show people empathy. As a transgender woman, I deal with people who are ignorant and terrible and say terrible things on a regular basis. And I don't hate them for that. I don't hate people I disagree with. And I disagree with a lot of people on a lot of things. That doesn't mean I hate them. I don't harbor that anger towards them. They honestly aren't worth any space in my head to hate. But what we can do is we can be open to having conversations. Again, there is a line when somebody is actually attacking you. It is important to step back and say, okay, I can't reach that person. Maybe somebody else can, but I can't. And it's important for us to show compassion and empathy and love, even to the people we disagree with, even to the people on the other side. And we have to remember in the course of political discussion that we are all human beings, and we shouldn't dehumanize each other by seeing each other as the enemy. That's the kind of training they teach you in war. See the other person as an enemy, less than human, because it's easier to kill, it's easier to destroy. We shouldn't be at a goal to destroy each other. We should be at a goal to learn to live freely and live with each other and have a society that's better for it because our efforts are being put into doing good and helping people rather than hurting them and destroying things.
So that leads to something that we can point to right away, that a lot of polarized Republicans and a lot of libertarians are objecting to. Joe Biden announced today that one of the very first things that he wants to do is to forgive $10,000 of student debt for every person who has debt right now, which is, in my mind, a little crazy, because although it is compassionate, it's not fair. What are your thoughts about that? The idea of forgiving $10,000 of student debt for everybody who has student debt right now?
Not everything is fair. We already know that. Fair has nothing to do with any of this. It's about improving the quality of a person's life. And in this case, an attempt to stimulate the economy by freeing up money that can go somewhere else. But let's take a look at student loans for a second, because the basis of student loans from the government is based on fraud. The practices of student loans being given to young people is fraudulent to begin with. The debt should be canceled completely because they should have never gotten this money to begin with. And the way the system is set up is that colleges continue to increase their tuitions. They have for the past 40 years since student loans came into play, because they know that money is guaranteed to them by the government, whether the student pays the loans back or not. It's guaranteed money for them. So the system is broken there. The loans are fraudulent. Most people don't even know what they're signing on for. We don't educate students to know how to calculate interest rates on their loans and understand what the principal and interest is. 90% of students who sign on to these loans have no idea what they are. And they were told, go to college, get a degree, your life's going to be better. Go to college, get a degree, your life's going to be better. This is what was preached to our generation by our parents, by our teachers, by society, by the government, by everybody. Take out your loans, go to school, get an education. These loans are predatory. They are very disjointed and very immoral. And the practice of the way it works needs to be completely revamped.
Well,
and
so
I understand the forgiveness because it's a predatory system that's been preying on people already. And yeah, you should know what you're signing when you sign something. But when there are predatory practices in place, when you can't discharge a student loan through bankruptcy like everything else you can, when they handcuff you to that debt and make it your livelihood at stake, yeah, we have other issues with the system. And so I'm okay with them revamping and wiping things out. And honestly, they should wipe out all student debt and start over with a system that's not predatory.
But if you did that, doesn't that punish the people who worked hard to not accumulate debt?
No.
I mean, doesn't it mean that they sort of made a stupid decision? Because
No.
they could have taken this debt and then it would have just been erased.
We are faced with opportunities in our lifetime every day, and we decide to do something or don't decide to do something for whatever reason. It's not a punishment. It's not a punishment to anybody who didn't receive a student loan. What it is correcting a wrong. The loans were predatory, they were fraudulent, and they should be wiped out because of that purpose. We don't believe in fraud as libertarians, right?
Well,
and so
but
many
certainly not all student loans are fraudulent.
The private loans are not. The government-backed ones are.
They're fraudulent because
the predatory practices, the years of manipulating students and telling them every aspect of your life, you have to go to college, you have to get a degree, this is what you have to do. My generation grew up in that. Everyone in my generation grew up with, you go to school, you go to college, you get a degree, you have a better life. You go to school, you go to college, you get a degree, you have a better life. Yeah, you have to take the loans if that's what it takes to go to college because you have to have a college degree to survive.
Right.
That's what we were told. That's what we were conditioned to. And then we are told to take out these loans that we don't understand. We weren't taught how to calculate the interest on our loans. We weren't taught the terms and agreements. We were just said, read this and sign. And most people say, okay, well, the government's not trying to hurt me. I'm just a kid. They want me to go to college and be okay. As we know, the government wants to hurt everybody.
Yeah. I think we're going to have to disagree on part of that. I really do strongly agree that, the country was actually founded on the idea of no debtors' prisons. Mm-hmm. You're supposed to be able to get rid of all of your debts through bankruptcy. Yeah. And I think that is an important thing to encourage, is to restore the right to default. In fact, when I ran for Congress in 2012, I talked about restoring the right to default, that people should be able to declare bankruptcy no matter what. And there are consequences for declaring bankruptcy. It hurts your credit rating, stuff like that.
Yes, but you shouldn't have to go into bankruptcy over fraud.
Yeah.
That's the thing. When something is predatory and is designed to entrap you.
I don't know. I know a lot of people who took out a lot of student loans. And they didn't think they were predatory. I think maybe you can do them on an individual case basis.
Maybe, perhaps.
Yes, somebody can do that. Because that happened a lot in the housing market as well.
Yes.
There's a lot of predatory loaning there. Yes. But, I'm a person who has a mortgage now. Mm-hmm. Not all housing loans were predatory.
Well, remember, the systems and the organizations that run the loans have become more consolidated, but there used to be a lot more organizations, and they've since been bought up into these other organizations like Sallie Mae. And yep. Sallie Mae had extremely predatory practices. And its parent company, Navient, has the same very extraordinary predatory practices when it comes to collecting, when it comes to just anything that has to do with trying to get relief from student loans or get help with student loans. And they actually had to put laws in place to protect students from that. And so when your loans are based on that kind of predatory, fraudulent practices where they're withholding information from you, when they're not working with you, when they're doing things that are downright illegal, and you can't even go through bankruptcy to discharge it, yeah, that's fraudulent. That company should be completely shut down.
So I definitely agree. The reason that you can't declare bankruptcy is because it's a guaranteed federal student loan.
Yes.
Which, that's the getting government out of that part of it.
Yes.
I completely agree with. I'm not as sanguine about the idea that somebody who entered into a loan in good faith should have that loan removed because just just because.
In good faith, I completely agree, but I don't think student loans that are backed by the government were good faith. I don't think they were good faith on part of the institutions that receive the loans. A lot of these schools knew that their graduation rates weren't as high. They knew that people were taking loans and getting degrees that were not going to lead them to better lives and better jobs. The whole premise around what we were sold when we were told to take these loans was a lie.
I agree with that, and I think that money lending is supposed to have risk in it. I mean, it's an investment,
absolutely,
just like any other investment, and so you assess the risk. I mean, I think there was a point in time at which the government said, well, people who we think should be going to college aren't able to go to college because they're not considered good risks, and banks aren't lending them money. I mean, do you think that's a place where there should be intervention?
I mean, that's fair. I mean, the interest rates on student loans should be extremely low, 1 or 2%. I mean, you're basically borrowing from your own tax dollars, right? So why should student loan interest rates be so high to begin with? But
well,
going
so
back to,
if we were to get the government out of that business,
yes, we should.
Then the banks ought to be able to charge whatever interest rate they want, right?
Yeah, the banks should.
So, in an ideal situation, we allow students to declare bankruptcy. The banks can set their interest rates to whatever they want, and nobody is guaranteed a student loan. They have to. One of the things that I talked about in 2012 when I talked about the right to default is that it should be hard to get a student loan if you want to go to school and get a degree in French literature, because there's just no demonstrated market for what that will return. On the other hand, if you're going pre-med, if you're going STEM, computer science, something like that, those things, it should be relatively easy to get a loan. And the banks are in the business of making money. They want to give out loans that they'll make a profit on. And they're competing with other banks, right? So if, one bank will give me a loan at 2%, another bank will give me a loan at 3%, I'm going to go to the 2% bank. They are competing with each other. I mean, and for people who don't, think it's sort of an esoteric thing, they have a interest rate essentially is the price of money. That's what you're paying for the loan. So I like the idea of being able to declare bankruptcy. I'm not ready to say that I think that we should get rid of all the pre-existing student loans. I think that, it was wrong. It was wrong. The government was backing loans, and it's completely warped the system. You see educational institutions now that cost way too much.
Yes.
Because they know that they can get that money from the government. I worked at a place that helped students get giant loans so that they could afford the tuition, even though they knew that a third of the students were going to fail out, which is just insane.
If that's not fraudulent, predatory practices, I don't know what is. That's the definition of predatory.
Right. The problem is hope. The problem is that people think, oh, I'm going to be in the 2/3 that are going to graduate. It's like a lottery ticket. Why do people buy lottery tickets? It's the same thing. But I think that definitely allowing students to declare bankruptcy and getting the government out of the student loan industry, that all makes a tremendous amount of sense.
Well, there's something, about the system that we didn't talk about. And one of the big reasons why these guaranteed loans came to tuition in the first place, that's the fact that marginalized people in poorer communities are going to have a lot harder time getting a loan from a bank.
Right.
They don't have those opportunities. And that's an important thing to note. And that is an important thing, an issue that would need to be solved before the government gets out of student loans. But the other thing that needs to be talked about before we talk about any of that is the fact that we don't teach students about loans in high school before they sign them and take them to go to college.
Yeah.
We don't teach students how to do basic checking accounts. We don't teach students how to manage money, what debt is, how it manages, how to calculate compound and simple interest. Those lessons are not taught to people ahead of time. So they're making ill-informed decisions because they've been told their whole lives, go to college, get a degree, life will be better. You need a degree to survive in the world. You have to do this. Go do it. And
Yeah.
if you think about that whole connection with being told your whole life growing up, you have to go to college, you have to get a degree, knowing that the system is set up not to teach you how to manage the debt that you're going to take on, and knowing that the universities themselves continue to jack up their prices, knowing that it's backed by the government, knowing that a lot of the students that they select are going to fail. And you can see that it's a predatory and it can be considered a fraudulent system, the system itself, and therefore the whole thing needs to be reformed and started over.
Right. I think that, I mean, once we give students the right to default on their loans, that fixes everything.
That
right?
helps for sure. But again, people entered these contracts without the knowledge of what the contracts really were.
Yeah, I have often said that I wish home economics courses
Yes.
actually taught the economics of your real life.
Yes.
People have no understanding. Like the first time you buy a house, or at least for me, the first time I bought a house, I was just astonished at points, PMA. What are all these things? I had never heard of any of these things beforehand. And it's funny because your parents could teach you some of that stuff, but it certainly didn't come up in my household. I was shocked. And other aspects of what is a loan. One of the things that I always think of is that, or at least when I bought my subsequent houses, is that rather than thinking about how much was I paying for the house, I said, how much is my mortgage payment going to be each month? How many months am I going to be paying that? And then I would just multiply that out and say, okay, so this is what I'm really paying for the house.
Exactly.
So I'm really paying, $3,000 a month. I'm really paying $36,000 a year. And if that's a 20-year loan, I'm actually paying $720,000, which is a lot more than what I had thought that I was paying for the house in the first place.
Exactly.
That sort of thing. I agree with you. Financial literacy is, I don't know that it's not taught because I don't know why it's not taught, but it's something that everybody needs at this point in time. It's something that we didn't really need when we weren't such a wealthy nation.
Correct.
But we are. I mean, even if you're in the middle class now, you have a lot of money, relatively speaking.
Yeah.
And so knowing how to manage your money and how managing your money increases your wealth is a big deal. So that's good. I think we've talked a little bit about the student loan. Let's talk about some of the other things that that the Biden administration is probably going to do. And it's going to be interesting. Well, first, actually, let's talk about something that the Biden administration might do in reference to what's happening right now. So we are, of course, the Liberty Lunch Power Hour. Our special guest is Ashley Shade, the chair of Outright Libertarians. My name is Dan Fishman. And this program is put on by People for Liberty. You can check us out at peopleforliberty.org. Let's talk about access and things that the Democrats might do, and talk about the internet, Twitter. So in the greatest irony of all, right? Donald Trump tried to ban TikTok, and now TikTok has banned Trump. However, Twitter, Facebook, all these other platforms have removed him. Let's talk about that first, and then we can go into what's happened with Parler. But let's talk first about the private companies removing somebody. Is that censorship?
Private companies have every right to determine who accesses their platforms. And if their consumer or person who is consuming their product doesn't follow their rules, they have every right to tell that person to leave. And if they continue not to follow their rules, then they have every right to ban them from the premises. It's no different than going to your local grocery store. And if you cause problems in the grocery store and they tell you, well, we have conduct rules, you have to follow these rules to shop with us, and they tell you you have to follow the rules and you continuously break them, eventually they're going to say you can't come back anymore. And that's exactly what Twitter did, and that's exactly what social media is doing. And they have every right to do so. Remember, freedom of speech protects you from the government telling you what you can or cannot say. It does not protect you from the consequences of what you say in a non-government setting.
And the freedom of speech says government shall make no law restricting
Correct.
your speech. It doesn't say anything about the fact that anybody else has to A, sit around and listen to you, or B, promote it. I often say, I'm a person who writes letters to the editor pretty frequently, and only about 1 out of every 5 of my letters gets published. Am I being censored? Is the New York Times censoring me by refusing to publish my letters to the editor? And is that illegal? Or is that exactly what they do because they get 1 million letters to the editor? So, sorry, I didn't want to cut you off. I just want to go on a little further on that. I think we're in basic agreement. A private company gets to do whatever they want, because the opposite of it would be the government requiring a private company to publish stuff that they might not agree with.
And we do not make any laws in that determination of freedom of speech.
100%. So let's talk about the next thing then. So that's Twitter removing the president, Facebook, and then I think every social media group is done. My understanding is that currently the president is posting nasty reviews on Mitt Romney's book on Amazon. That's how he's getting his message out. I mean, they're scathing reviews, but on Parler now. So have you ever been on Parler? And if so, can you tell our audience what Parler is?
I've never signed up for an account on Parler. I've seen messages and screenshots, and Parler has a social media app just like any other app. It works similar to Facebook, actually probably closer to MeWe social media app. I would say Parler looks similar to MeWe. Parler was created as an application to for those people who felt that Facebook's rules and other social media companies' rules were too much. And so they decided to create their own app with a lot less rules and a lot less restrictions. And they put it out there, and a lot of people have joined.
Now, interestingly, Parler did have a much stricter authentication system for people when they signed in. You had to send in a picture of your driver's license, the front and the back. And for people who don't know this, I don't know if I'm breaking the story or not, but about 6 to 8 hours ago, Parler was completely hacked, and all the pictures of everybody's driver's license, front and back, are now floating around the interwebs. So thanks, Parler. In that unfettered site, people did a lot of stuff. There was, and we should point out, Parler is not the only unfiltered site out there. There are other places that you can go. There's nothing preventing anybody from putting up their own website, posting a blog. I've had a blog since like 1999. If you want to go back and see my thoughts on the early Superman movies, I wrote extensively about that. But there's OnlyFans, there's MeWe, there's all these other sites that you can put your content on if you want to. So Parler, they have two things. They have the website, and then they have the mobile app that actually just accesses the website. Apple and Google said, we're not going to have the mobile app in our app stores anymore. That's not really such a big deal, because you can still install a mobile app without the blessing from the App Store.
Yes.
I know that because I have a mathematician's weakness for gambling and a love of football. And DraftKings has a completely legal gamble on football app, but you can't get it through the app stores. You have to go to DraftKings website. They tell you how to install the app on your mobile device, and then you can gamble, because whatever, they're sensitive about gambling.
Yes.
But so Parler could do that, and people could install the app, except that yesterday, 2 days ago, Amazon, who's the hosting company for Parler, said, we don't want to host you anymore. And so now parlors completely down.
Mm-hmm.
Is there some difference with a web hosting company that essentially just provides websites to everybody, saying to somebody, we find your content offensive and we're not going to host it anymore?
No, Amazon is a private company. They have every right to say, your content violates our standards, our community standards, and because you refuse to do anything about it, we're not going to associate with you. It's the exact same principle at play. If you do something that violates an organization's rules about how to maintain security or how to maintain whatever the agreement is there as far as the terms are, and you violate that and you refuse to change it, they have every right to disassociate with you.
So then that leads us to an interesting question. And it comes to this is the crux of the matter, and the split the Libertarian Party down the middle question.
Mm-hmm.
Is that somehow related to a bake the cake type of question?
No.
Why not?
Here's the thing with the bake the cake. Here's my perspective of it, because people have different opinions on this. And I'm going to give you a perspective that I believe to truly be libertarian.
Okay.
And people are either going to agree or disagree. But when it comes to a bake the cake scenario, what my perspective is that the person baking cakes should not have to bake a cake with a design that they are uncomfortable with. It becomes discrimination when they say, you are gay, I'm not going to serve you at all.
Right.
It's not discrimination if they say, I cannot make that content for you. That is different. They're still willing to serve you if they're still willing to serve you as a customer and make a standard item, then I wouldn't consider that discrimination.
So that's very much like what Gary Johnson said, where he said, if you're a baker and you bake cakes, you have to sell cakes.
Yes.
But if you're an artist and you decorate cakes, that's protected by the First Amendment. And all decoration can't be compelled one way or the other.
Mm-hmm.
So if you make wedding cakes, you have to make wedding cakes.
Yes.
I have a different idea, and I'll just run it past you, and you can tell me how crazy you think it is. It's sort of based on the idea in the Civil Rights Act of what's called a public accommodation.
Mm-hmm.
So if I want to open a business, like let's just say I'm going to open up well, let's say I'm going to open up a bakery, right? Where you live out in, so we both used to be residents of Massachusetts. Now only you are a resident of Massachusetts, but we lived on opposite ends of the state.
Yes.
You live in North Adams, population of
about 13,000.
13,000. I lived in Beverly, which is a population of about 50,000, but really, within 20 miles, there's easily, 400,000 people of me. I would, if I were going to pick a place to open up a bakery, I would want to pick the place that had the most potential customers.
Yes.
Plus, a city like Beverly, it has municipal Wi-Fi and solid electricity and police and all these services that are being provided by the public. And great snow removal, all these other things. When I open up a business in Beverly, I have to get a business license from Beverly.
Yes.
And that is a contract.
Yes.
Saying that they will provide me for services. In return, I will serve the public.
Yes.
And I argue that if you are a public accommodation, if you get that deal
yes.
with the city, then you're agreeing to serve the public.
Agreed.
As opposed to, right, if I wanted to, I can go to unincorporated land, or I can sell on the internet. And on the internet, I can refuse anything I want, right? And if I don't live inside of a city or municipal thing, if I, go to, I'm trying to think of what's the smallest, most terrible town in Massachusetts. I want to say Athol, just because it sounds, but whatever it is, in some place where if the city wants to say, okay, that's not part of our deal, you don't have to serve anybody, anything like that, they can do those laws. But then I'm not a public accommodation, or I'm doing that. And so that's always been my take on it, is that people want to have their business in public because they want to sell to the public.
Yes.
And if you say, oh, I want access to all the customers, I want people to walk into my store and be able to buy my cakes and stuff like that, part of your deal with the general public who's paying for your sidewalk to be shoveled and for, you know, the electricity wires that are maintaining all that stuff that maintains your business, is that you have to serve everybody. You have to serve every taxpayer.
That makes sense, but I see the other point of that too. Whereas I wouldn't want, if I was a baker and somebody came in and said, "Please make me a cake with a giant swastika," and I've got a problem with that, and I'm not going to do that. And so, you know, the person creating the content should have control over the creation of the content. What they should not have control over is telling a customer you can't be here because you are different.
I agree with that 100%. I think that your First Amendment rights are your First Amendment rights, and you don't have to design anything, whether it's, you know, you're a caker decorating a cake, or a seamstress sewing a design on the back of a leather jacket, or whatever. Your First Amendment rights should never be violated. You shouldn't have to do anything that you don't want.
Now, if you are a wedding cake maker and you refuse to make a gay couple a wedding cake, which is what you make, then that is discrimination, because you're telling them that you will not serve them because they're gay. That's wherein the problem lies. That's the difference.
Right.
If that is what you do, and you're telling a particular group of people that you refuse to serve them, now we've got into discriminatory practices.
So then let's get back to this idea, and I'm giving you the hardball questions because I know you can hit them out of the park. If all you do is provide websites, you don't have anything to do with decorating or anything like that, all you do is provide somebody with a machine and they can put a website up there, isn't that the same sort of thing?
No.
Okay.
It's not public accommodation. It's a business contract in this case. This is not public accommodation with the government. What it is a contract, and they have their own terms for conduct. And if you violate those terms and illegal content is put on your website, which is what was happening with Parler, where some of the content was actually illegal and they refused to do anything about it. They were given the opportunity to fix the problem. They refused. And so you have a right, then Amazon absolutely has a right to say, well, now you're breaking the law. We want no part of it, and we're out.
You hit that. You are 100%. Like I said, that was a fastball pitch, but you hit it out of the park. That's exactly right. It's because the contract, Amazon protects themselves by putting in the contract saying, look, if you do stuff that we don't like, we're not going to give you a platform. And it's not like they're the only way to get on the internet.
Correct.
Right? People have all sorts of other options where they can get on the internet. This is just Amazon's hosting.
But especially when the content becomes illicit and illegal. Yeah. That's the bigger thing. It's not even that they don't like the content. There's content that has questionable legalities, and even some of it that is of things that are illegal. And when it gets to that point where it causes harm to society because of the illegal, because it's promoting violence, because of whatever these actions are, when you get to that point where people are being hurt by that content, not only do you have the right to remove it, but you have a responsibility to the public that you serve already as your clients to remove it, to protect them.
I think you have a responsibility as a responsible business.
Yes.
I agree with that. But all right, well, we are coming to the end of the Liberty Lunch Power Hour, brought to you by People for Liberty with our special guest, Ashley Shade. Before I bring back president of People for Liberty, Lauren Postler, to talk us out of the show, tell me what you see coming up in the next year. What are the exciting opportunities for the Liberty movement?
Yeah, so 2021 is all about municipal elections, and we have a real opportunity to make change in this world and really take hold of our communities. And so I would encourage all of us.
Speaking of elections, right? Do you have anything you'd like to tell us?
Yeah, let me get to that. Okay. But what I would do is I would say now is the opportunity to engage your communities where you are. Now is the opportunity to talk to your neighbors and your friends and the people you live with and around you. Talk to the business owners, talk to the businesses, and work with them and get involved now. Run for local office, do something to help change your community. Because right now we have a unique opportunity to no longer be the party or be a voice, to be a new voice, and one that doesn't say, we're running against you because all your terribles are bad, your ideas are terrible and bad, but to run for office because we want to truly set people free and do good in our communities and for people. And so I have recently announced, as of today, that I have created an exploratory committee to run for office, and I am committed to running for office in 2021. And I am going to campaign on compassion and empathy and education and love, and not against anybody's ideas or what anybody else believes in, but for liberty and for compassion and for love. And it's going to be a different type of campaign because people don't campaign on those types of ideas anymore. They campaign on, well, at least my ideas aren't as bad as theirs, or at least my ideas are right and theirs are wrong and they're all terrible. And we have to put an end to that practice. We have to be the example. We have to show people that it can be better. And so I'm going to step up and show what I believe in.
What are you running for?
I'm sorry?
What will you be running for?
I haven't officially announced that yet. I'm exploring a few different positions. Locally, we have school board, city council, and mayor all up for election. I will officially announce what position I run for after doing a little bit more work with my team. We're going to look into this campaign strategy, how it's going to work in each of those positions, and which one is going to be the most viable for this to be effective in. And we will decide then within a couple of months. Nomination papers out here come out between April and June. So I will probably announce officially by March what position I'm going to run for. As of right now, it's just an exploratory committee looking into those different positions and how we can be the example of liberty and love in my own community, and hope it spreads from there to everybody else.
That's awesome. Ashley, as always, this has been a pleasure. Whenever you and I get together for a Liberty conversation, it's always spirited and exciting. And I'm happy to welcome back in Lauren Postler, who is the president of People for Liberty. Lauren, thanks for coming back in.
Thanks, Dan. And Ashley, I agree with Dan. I always love when we get to share the screen together and your thoughts on liberty and really, our responsibility to each other, to this community, and to our nation. Love that you're exploring the opportunity to run, and encourage everyone to follow your lead if they're interested, and form an exploratory committee and suss out those viable options. I want to say a big thank you to everyone who's tuned in with us today. Kathy, Michael, Amber, there's a great long list of people who've shared their thoughts over the comments, which is always a great place for dialogue in our Facebook and on our YouTube page. We will also be sharing footage of today's conversation with our groups. So People for Liberty is proud to serve over 16 different peer groups, including Women Voters for Liberty, Military Supporters for Liberty, LGBT plus for Liberty, where Ashley is one of our admins and moderators. So if you're interested in exploring more about the Liberty movement, maybe you're just learning, or maybe you're hardcore, our groups are a great place to explore those conversations, the principles, the ideas, in a safe space with people who you can relate with. And so I encourage you to check out all of our groups, join a few if you're interested, and stay tuned as we're going to have more of these lunch hour conversations. We know that we'll be talking definitely in response to the State of the Union, which will be coming up. And Dan, I want to thank you for your time. This has been a wonderful, wonderful conversation and opportunity. And we're looking forward to more chats with you, my friend.
Thanks for inviting me. I really appreciate it. Thanks, guys, so much. Remember, the website is peopleforliberty.org. Let me pop that up on the screen once more. Go there to find out more about us and find our links for Twitter, Facebook, everything else. And remember, Be ready for an announcement from Ashley soon about something exciting happening in North Adams. Bye, everybody.